So, uh, graphics don't matter anymore, right? When I was a kid, it was kind of an unspoken rule that graphics were the most important part of what makes a video game good. Yeah, sure, the gameplay's awesome. Yeah, okay, the story's pretty good. Sure, the music's banging, but how does the game look, my guy? And I feel like it wasn't until this current PS5 and Xbox Series generation that this graphics craze finally ended. We live in a time where the most popular video games like Minecraft, Fortnite, Valorant, Apex Legends, none of these games strive for photorealism. And I need to make this clear for people out there who are a little bit younger, but for decades, good graphics and realistic graphics were seen as the same thing. Good and realistic were conflated. Here's two key examples. Back in the very late 90s, there was an article written comparing Castlevania 64 to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and the writer was praising Castlevania 64 for the way it looked and kind of making fun of the antiquated, in air quotes, Castlevania Symphony of the Night for having 2D pixelated graphics. And here we are today, and we all know how the reputation of those two games shaped out to be. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is arguably the greatest video game ever crafted, and Castlevania 64 is a game. Here is my second and overused example. Nintendo fans fell in love with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask back on the N64, which, depending on who you talk to, some people could argue that at the time, those two games were striving for some sort of realism with their graphics. Personally, I wouldn't argue that, but to each their own. So, in the year 2000, when Nintendo had their Space World trade show, which they no longer do, Nintendo shot themselves in the foot by showing off a tech demo of what every Zelda fan wanted: a more realistic, a more serious looking Zelda game. But when Nintendo a year later finally showed off their actual next 3D Zelda game, surprise, surprise, it looked nothing like that tech demo. It was a cartoony, anime-ish, Studio Ghibli-inspired graphical style. And fans were enraged for years after Wind Waker came out. Even 2 years later, Electronic Gaming Monthly ran an article, an April Fool's Day joke, where they claimed that Wind Waker was going to be remade with Twilight Princess graphics. And you know what's crazy? People probably really wanted that. And personally, I think it would kill like half the spirit of that game. It's kind of sad to say, but the Wind Waker graphics controversy is kind of just stapled to that game's legacy. And as a person who grew up on Nintendo handhelds, the Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance, the DS, I always just kind of accepted that home consoles were the place for 3D, big, flashy, realistic looking video games. And handhelds were kind of the home for these silly, smaller, less important, I'm using air quotes for people who aren't watching the video, why aren't you watching the video, games. If you grew up with a PSP, you probably feel a little differently because at times the PSP felt like a portable PS2. And the only reason I'm bringing up old handhelds is because a couple of months ago, a lot of rumors were circulating that Sony was looking into making the PlayStation 6 either dockable or to have a dockable secondary version like the Switch. And we've already seen Xbox take their first steps into this portable, dockable world with their partnership with ROG. Maybe I'm reading things that aren't actually there, but it really seems like to me that all the big hardware manufacturers in the gaming space are trying to go portable. And that just tells me that beautiful, cutting edge, realistic graphics are no longer a high priority for these manufacturers. Because the simple truth is you just can't have the most cutting edge technology put into a handheld. It takes a couple of years to be able to make that technology shrunk down that it could fit into a handheld. And honestly, if this is where we're heading, where every hardware manufacturer in gaming is going portable and photorealistic graphics are not that important, I would be totally okay with that. Because dude, yesterday I beat Metroid Prime 4 and that game looks gorgeous. I played it at 1080p, 120 FPS, and I have like basically no complaints with how it looked and how it ran. Like some of the textures at times were like but 95% of the time that game blew me away with how it looked. The other stuff, not really, but plus think about it. Cyberpunk 2077 runs great on Switch too, and it looks like From Software is really polishing up their Elden Ring port. And I just do not need video games to look better than Cyberpunk 2077 and Elden Ring. I just don't. Do you? Because if you do, I just think that's kind of strange. No offense. Like, did it really add to Horizon Forbidden West that we could see Aloy's peach fuzz on her cheeks? Did it make that game better? And we have to ask ourselves, like, do we actually want photorealism? Do you actually want to see the fleshy, shiny bits of brain matter splatter all over your screen as you're getting headshots in Call of Duty? Like, I'm sure some people want that, but I think many other people, myself included, might be like a little creeped out by that. Even realistic looking games like The Last of Us Part 2, to me that still looks like a video game. But there's people out there clamoring for more and more realism. And of course, there's indie games. Back in the mid to late 2000s, indie games cracked that barrier I mentioned before. No longer were 2D games regulated to like browser games, flash games, or handhelds. You now had games like Cave Story, Braid, Super Meat Boy, delivering 2D games to a new generation, myself included at the time. And now it's not even just 2D games. Indie games are striving to go for that ugly, in air quotes because I love it, PS1 blocky graphical style. And this style is incredibly popular with thousands and thousands of people, again, myself included. And it's really funny because a couple of weeks ago there was an interview with Koji Sugimoto, and he basically said that he really doesn't understand why indie games are trying to go for PS1 style graphics, because he's been around for a while, and he said that back in the day they were trying so hard to not look like that, but it was the only way they could make a 3D game back then. And he just finds it confusing that people like it now. And I think that just shows you this full cycle we've went in where people just kind of don't care how realistic graphics are anymore. This might be a really, really controversial take for all my photographers out there. I don't mean any disrespect, but if you put like a really gorgeous, expertly done painting and you put it right next to an equally as gorgeous, equally as expertly done photograph, I am always going to prefer the painting, because the painting is not just about the image in the frame. A painting is the artist's representation, interpretation, and feelings towards that image in the frame. Whereas a photograph to me comes off a bit more like mathematical, a bit more scientific, where you're thinking a bit more about the lighting and the angle. And of course you're thinking about lighting and angles and paintings too, but you get what I mean, right? Like at the end of the day, I know both are really amazing and both are super artistic, but I have my preference. Again, this might be harder for younger people to appreciate, but I just don't think we're ever going to see a graphical leap like the PS1 to the PS2. Those harsh, blocky angles on 3D models were mostly ironed out. You could make out details on characters' faces, and environments felt more alive than ever. There's no better example than looking at Solid Snake on the PS1 compared to the PS2. We're never gonna see that again. And the simple fact is, kids today, and probably even 5 years ago, are growing up playing these cartoony games like Fortnite. So I really do think the next generation of mid-20s depressed gamers are not going to care at all about how realistic a game looks. And I think that's super cool. There's a lot to be irritated about the way games are discussed, analyzed, and criticized, but I just think it's really refreshing that how a game looks is kind of not part of that equation anymore. I think that's really cool. We've seen now that games are mostly about the heart and soul behind it and how it plays, and I just can't think of anything more important than that. See you next time.